When two guards tried to remove a black Marine from his son's graduation, no one expected 6 Navy SEALs to stand up from the crowd. They stopped the whole room without speaking a word. Solomon Dryden did not expect anyone to notice him when he parked behind Elmridge High. The school looked like many small-town Texas schools. Old red bricks, a few flags waving at the entrance, and kids hanging out near the gym doors. The place was crowded already. Parents wore dress shirts, siblings held signs, and a grandmother leaned on a walker. Solomon parked his Dodge Charger near the chain-link fence and stepped out. His deep blue Marine uniform was neat, and his boots shined like glass. He did not dress this way to impress anyone. It was simply who he was. He stood tall with a soldier's posture. His calm face carried the silence of someone who had seen too much in life. He had driven 8 hours from Temple, Texas, to see his son's graduation. He could have flown, but the Charger was his late wife's favorite car. Even 2 years after her death, driving it made him feel close to her. Before walking in, Solomon opened the glove box and pulled out a small, worn photo with a torn corner. It showed his wife holding their baby son, Tyron. He slipped it into his jacket and whispered, "I promised you I wouldn't miss it." His walk to the entrance was slow and full of meaning. His chest was heavy with a feeling he couldn't name, something between pride and pain. Inside, the gym was packed. Folding chairs filled the floor, and the bleachers overflowed with people. The air smelled of popcorn and floor wax. It was noisy, messy, and alive. At the door, a short man with a headset checked Solomon's ticket. "You're good. Family seating, 3rd row on the left." Solomon nodded. "Appreciate it." His voice was steady. As he walked down the row, people stared at his uniform. Some looked away quickly. One woman smiled softly and whispered to the man next to her. Solomon ignored it. Being tall, black, and in uniform, he knew what those looks meant. He sat down in a plastic chair that wobbled a little. He adjusted it without complaint. The stage in front of him had banners that read, "Class of 2024" in silver letters. A few school officials stood near the podium. At the far end, rows of students waited. Somewhere among them was Tyron, tall, thin, with his mother's eyes. 18 years had passed so quickly. Solomon remembered holding Tyron the night he was born. He had flown in from Okinawa with dirt still on his hands, still in uniform, just to see his son's first hours of life. And now here they were. He sat still, barely blinking, soaking in the moment. Around him, people shuffled, laughed, and dropped coffee cups. None of it reached him. His world was only the stage, the students, and the photo pressed against his chest. Then the music began. Pomp and circumstance. The crowd stood, and so did Solomon. His shoulders were squared, arms straight at his sides. Next came the national anthem. Everyone put a hand on their heart. Solomon didn't move. He didn't need to. His whole body was already a salute. He thought of his wife again, how she would have cried through the ceremony, how she would have straightened Tyron's tie 3 times before he left home. His eyes stayed forward. As the last note faded, 2 uniformed men walked down the side aisle, heading straight for him. They were not police. Their black polo shirts read Harlan Security Services. Radios hung from their belts. One was short, wide-shouldered, with a shaved head. The other was taller, thin, and chewing gum. The tall guard chewed his gum like he had somewhere better to be. Solomon noticed them right away, but did not move. His training had taught him long ago that being still often showed more strength than action. He kept his eyes forward, hands resting lightly on his legs. The shorter guard stopped beside him and leaned close enough to speak quietly. "Excuse me, sir. We need you to come with us." Solomon slowly turned his head. "Is there a problem?" The taller guard stepped forward. "Yeah, this section is for families of graduating seniors." Solomon blinked, then reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the same printed ticket he had already shown at the door. "This is my seat, 3rd row, left side. Family seating." The short guard didn't even look at the ticket. "We were told it's full." Solomon didn't move. "It was full when I sat down too. Why don't you tell me who gave that order?" The tall guard shifted, caught off guard by Solomon's calm, steady voice. "Look, it's not a big deal. There are extra seats in the back. Let's not make this into something it doesn't need to be. Solomon's eyes narrowed slightly. Not in anger, but in thought. I drove 8 hours to see my son walk across that stage. I'll be sitting right here. A few people nearby had started to notice. A woman 2 rows over nudged her husband. Someone in the bleachers tilted their phone, maybe recording. The short guard straightened, looked around, and said, "Sir, I'll ask one more time." "You can ask all day," Solomon said, his voice lower and firmer now. "I'm not moving." The tall guard sucked his teeth. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back." "That's all we're saying." And there it was. Solomon looked at him fully now. That phrase wasn't about rules or seating. It was about something older, quieter, something he had lived with all his life. In boardrooms, on porches, in waiting rooms, even on base, always behind a smile, hidden under a whisper. He didn't answer. The air in the gym seemed to shift. People began to sense that a line had been crossed. The short guard felt it too. He touched the radio on his belt and muttered into the mic, his eyes never leaving Solomon's. Solomon stayed seated, staring at the stage as if the talk was over. Because for him, it was. A pale-skinned older woman sitting beside him leaned closer and whispered, "Don't you let them move you." He gave her a small nod but said nothing. He didn't want a scene. He just wanted to watch his son graduate. But the guards weren't done. The tall one lowered his voice again. "Look, if you got a problem, take it up with the school office. We're following orders." Solomon turned his head. "You got a name, son?" The guard blinked. "It's Officer Malley." "Not officer," Solomon said quietly. "You're private security," the short one cut in. "That's enough. If you don't stand up—" But he never finished, because just then, the far gym doors opened with a click. 6 men walked in. No uniforms, no badges, but their posture told the story. Strong shoulders, calm faces, men who had been through worse than stares and bad instructions. They didn't enter together. They spread out, one by one, sitting in different spots like they weren't connected. But anyone watching closely could see they moved alike, watched alike, sat alike, still, steady, and ready. Solomon didn't look back. He didn't have to. He already knew who they were. The guards didn't. Not yet. But they were about to. Solomon kept his eyes on the stage. His jaw didn't move, but inside something had clicked. Not anger. Not yet. But like a switch being turned on. He didn't use it unless he had to. The part of him built for survival, for balance, for patience under pressure. The 2 guards didn't leave. They stayed close. The kind of hovering that wasn't about doing their job. It was about reminding someone who had the power. But they didn't understand. Solomon had lived in places where power meant life or death, not a school gym with folding chairs and a sound system. A student's name was called on stage, and the crowd clapped politely. But nearby, people weren't watching the graduation anymore. They were watching the standoff, pretending not to. The tall guard, Malley, shifted again. He leaned closer, his voice quieter. "I'm trying to do you a favor here. This doesn't need to get ugly." Solomon's eyes flicked toward him. "You don't have that kind of favor to offer." Malley pulled back, unsure. But the shorter guard, Garvin, was less patient. He didn't like being challenged. His hand hovered near his radio again. A few rows behind, a man stood up slowly. Nobody noticed at first. He didn't say a word, just crossed his arms and stared. Clean-shaven, broad, sharp eyes. He sat near the aisle, never breaking his gaze from the scene. Then another man stood on the opposite side of the gym. Same posture, same calm intent. Then a third. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Solomon knew them all. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. His instincts told him the truth. He had led these men through mud, through gunfire, through silences darker than most people could imagine. Garvin leaned in again, his voice different now. "Listen, man, you're making this into a situation." Solomon turned his head slowly, carefully. "And you're not listening." Garvin's hand twitched toward his radio, but before he could press it, a voice cut through the air. "Is there a reason this man's being bothered?" It was clear, calm, controlled. Not loud, but strong enough to make the whole room stop talking. The voice came from a tall man with a salt and pepper beard, wearing a fitted black coat over a gray shirt. His name was Creed Marston. Solomon had once pulled him from the wreckage in Kandahar, dragging him across 200 yards of sand while bullets rained like gravel. Garvin looked up, caught off guard. "Who are you?" Creed didn't answer. He took one step forward. "I asked you a question." Malley raised a hand. "Sir, we've got this under control." "No," Creed said sharply. "You don't." Another man stood in the bleachers. Then another. 4 of them now. Solomon stayed seated, silent. But the entire left side of the gym was watching openly. A boy pointed. A teacher tried to turn attention back to the stage, but no one cared about diplomas anymore. Creed stepped closer. "You're embarrassing yourselves, and you're one breath away from making this worse." Garvin glanced at Malley, who looked less sure by the second. They hadn't expected backup, especially not backup like this. "I don't care what your orders were," Creed said. "You don't touch that man. You don't tell him to move. You don't ask again." The silence in the gym was heavy, not with fear but with respect. A respect that grew as more people realized what was happening. Solomon finally looked at Creed and gave a small nod. Not thanks, not a request, just recognition. Creed's eyes softened for a moment. Then he stepped back and sat down again, arms folded. But the tension stayed thick. People waited to see what the guards would do next. The gym around Solomon faded. The stage, the banners, the faces all blurred away. His eyes were still open, but his mind pulled him backward 15 years. Afghanistan. Late afternoon in Kandahar province. The sun there didn't set softly. It crashed down like a hammer, turning sand to rust and air to steel. Back then, Solomon was a gunnery sergeant. He had just finished briefing his unit when everything went wrong. A roadside IED exploded under their convoy, flipping the lead Humvee like a toy. Dirt and metal rained down before anyone could scream. Then came the gunfire. Not random. Coordinated. Solomon didn't think. He moved, ducking behind the twisted remains of a door frame. Smoke filled the valley. But Solomon saw 6 men trapped behind the burning wreckage of a second vehicle. Most were pinned down. One man was already crawling forward, dragging another by the vest. That was Creed Marston. He had only been in the country 3 months, and a bullet had torn through his thigh. Solomon ran without hesitation. No radio call, no pause. He sprinted across open ground, dodging gunfire, and slid into cover behind a broken axle. Creed looked up, blood on his face, gasping. "You're bleeding," Solomon told him. "You noticed," Creed coughed. Solomon grabbed the straps of the soldier beside him, Enrique Soto, and began pulling. Creed pushed from behind, wincing in pain with every inch. "Where's Divas?" Solomon shouted. Creed pointed weakly. "Left side, under the hood." That's when Solomon saw him. A young SEAL pinned under part of the engine block, his leg trapped. He was yelling for help but too far gone to move. "Keep low and move when I move," Solomon told Creed. Creed nodded. That was the moment he began to truly understand what leadership looked like. Solomon sprinted again. His foot hit gravel, then bone, but he didn't stop. He slid to Divas, crouched low, and gripped the mangled hood with both hands. It wouldn't move. "Gunny, don't! I'm good! I'm good!" Divas shouted. "You're not staying here," Solomon said. He planted one foot deep and lifted. His shoulders strained, his ribs burned, and the metal groaned. But it rose just enough for Divas to pull his leg free. They both fell back, crawling toward the ridge as gunfire cracked overhead. Creed returned with Soto, limping on his good leg. 2 others, Lim and Horton, followed, their faces black with ash, rifles ready. When the firing finally stopped, there were no cheers, no victory words, just silence and breathing. All 6 of them were alive. Solomon was the last to move. He stayed on rear watch until the dust settled and the medevac arrived. He didn't speak for a long time after that, but Creed remembered. They all remembered. From that day forward, there was never a question. If Solomon asked for anything, anywhere, any time, they would be there. Back in the gym, Creed sat quietly, his eyes locked on the guard standing near Solomon. He wasn't thinking about war now. He was thinking about promises. The man who had dragged him out of a war zone was being harassed at a high school graduation for wanting to see his son walk across a stage. Creed's fists clenched. Another SEAL, Javier Meeks, walked in and sat 4 rows back. Then Zachary Wells took a spot in the bleachers on the right. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Solomon glanced toward the back of the gym just briefly. His eyes met Meeks. That was enough. The guards didn't understand what that look meant. Not yet, but they would. The ceremony went on, at least on the surface. Names were called. Families clapped, some too loudly, trying to cover the thick tension in the air. But people weren't watching the stage anymore. Their eyes kept sliding back to the 3rd row on the left, where Solomon Dryden sat like stone and 2 guards hovered, unsure of their next move. Garvin looked to the front, where a school official tried to get his attention. The woman looked nervous, mouthing words and motioning toward him to back off. But Garvin shook his head. He wasn't walking away. His ego wouldn't let him. Mally shifted his weight again, chewing his gum harder now, clearly uncomfortable, but still not leaving. "Sir," Garvin said loudly this time, "this is your last warning." Solomon didn't move. His voice was calm, steady. "To do what exactly?" Garvin stepped forward, leaning in so close his belt brushed Solomon's knee. "Stop making a scene. We don't want trouble. Just move to the back." Solomon turned his head and looked straight into his eyes. "You're the only one causing trouble." Garvin's nostrils flared. Then the words slipped out. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everybody else? This is a high school, man." "Not your base." A hush fell over the rows nearby. A little girl stopped moving in her seat. A father froze, camera mid-zoom. Even Mally stepped back slightly, like the words had landed heavier than he expected. Solomon didn't blink. He took a breath. Not to calm down, but to stay steady. "You need to walk away." Garvin didn't. His hand dropped toward his belt. Not a weapon, but close enough to look threatening. That's when Creed stood. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He just stepped into the aisle, slow and focused, like this had now become his business. The gym wasn't completely silent, but close. Creed's voice was clear. "If you touch him, you'll answer to me." Garvin turned his head. "And who the hell are you?" Creed stepped closer. "The man telling you this ends right now." One of the school board members whispered something to the principal. An assistant principal hurried toward the back, talking into her walkie. The school staff was finally realizing this wasn't going away quietly. More SEALs rose from their seats. They didn't form a line. They didn't give a signal, just instinct all at once. Now all 6 stood. Garvin looked around. This wasn't just some angry parent. Something was different. These men didn't fidget. They didn't shift nervously. Their presence filled the room like pressure before a storm. Creed took another step forward. "You've got 2 choices. Walk away now, or watch this turn into something you don't want." Mally's voice cracked. "Let's just back off, man." But Garvin still hesitated. Solomon spoke again, not to Garvin, but to Creed. "Don't waste your breath." He already made his decision. Creed didn't smile. His voice dropped one last time. "Don't mistake silence for weakness." Finally, Garvin stepped back. Not much, but enough. His hand moved away from his belt. His face was red, but he was outnumbered and outclassed. The principal appeared, whispering firmly to the guards. Whatever she said sent them both walking toward the back exit. They didn't look at anyone as they left. Solomon exhaled, slow and steady. Creed sat back down without a word. The 6 SEALs stayed standing, their presence still heavy in the air. And Tyron Dryden was watching. He stood with the other graduates, hands clenched at his sides. He was near the center of the class, between a girl with bright braids and a boy whose gown kept slipping. They laughed nervously and checked their name cards, trying to act normal. But Tyron's world wasn't normal anymore. He had seen the guards walking toward his father from the moment the anthem ended. At first he thought maybe it was nothing, just routine, maybe helping someone find a seat. But something in his chest told him otherwise. Then he saw the way his father sat. So still, so composed, but locked in. Tyron knew that look. He had seen it before, when he was 12, and came home crying after someone said something cruel at school. His dad hadn't raised his voice then either. He had just sat the same way, like steel that would never bend. Tyron kept his eyes on the scene as best he could from the line. He couldn't hear the words, but the body language told him enough. He saw the guards too close, his father calm, refusing to move. He saw the tall man in the dark coat stand, and somehow he knew this wasn't just a parent. That man knew his father. Then another man stood. And another. It wasn't loud, but the temperature in the room seemed to change. Everyone was watching. Tyron's heart beat faster. He wasn't scared. It was something else. Something between pride and fire. He had grown up hearing small pieces of his father's service, not the bloody details. His dad kept those to himself. Just pieces. A buddy who sent Christmas cards. A scar from somewhere out in the dust. A box in the garage marked Kandahar that no one ever opened. He never knew the names. He never saw the faces. Until now. And here they were, standing like they had never stopped having his father's back. Tyron blinked hard, pushing away the sting in his eyes. He wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. The line moved forward. A few more names were called. The clapping started again, like someone had pressed play after a pause. But the room wasn't the same anymore. The energy had changed. It wasn't about balloons or banners now. It was about respect. An assistant principal tapped Tyron's shoulder and said something he didn't catch. He just nodded. The student next to him leaned over and whispered, "That your dad?" Tyron didn't answer. He didn't have to. The whole gym had seen it. Now everyone there understood what kind of man Solomon Dryden was. In the audience, Creed remained standing. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't checking for approval. He was watching Solomon, still seated in the same plastic chair, hands on his lap, eyes locked on the stage as if nothing had happened. But everyone knew something had. The other SEALs stayed on their feet too, not posing, just present. Their silence said more than any microphone could. Some parents clapped louder for the next names, as if trying to cover the earlier tension. The gym felt alive, stirred awake by injustice, and held steady by honor. Solomon stayed still, not bitter, not defiant, just present, a father watching his son step into adulthood. But the moment that would truly break through was still coming. When Tyron's name was called, the room wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. The line moved faster now. Some students fidgeted, fixed their caps, whispered jokes. But Tyron wasn't in that space anymore. His mind kept flashing back to his father, sitting alone but completely centered, like the chair had been built for him. Calm, quiet, unshakable. And those men, those warriors, rising around him without needing to be asked. For the first time, Tyron realized he didn't fully know the weight his father carried. He had seen the pictures, the medals in the wooden box, the folded flag on the bookshelf. But those things didn't speak. Today they did. Today they stood. The assistant principal called another name. Then another. Tyron was 3 people from the stage. He wiped his palms on his gown and tried to breathe slower. The girl in front turned, grinning nervously. "You ready?" Tyron smiled. "More than you know." He stepped forward. Across the gym, Solomon leaned slightly forward. His eyes never left the stage. He didn't clap for every student, not out of disrespect, but because his focus had narrowed to one boy. The boy in the black robe with red and white honor cords. The boy who looked so much like his mother when he smiled. One name, then another. Then the announcer paused, cleared her throat, and spoke with more weight. "Tyron Dryden." The name echoed. For half a second, silence. Then the room exploded. Clapping, cheering, whistles. But what stood out wasn't the noise. It was the rhythm. The sound was strong, steady, deliberate. The 6 SEALs still standing raised their hands and clapped in perfect unison. Each clap was forceful, not for show but for meaning. A salute without the salute. A gesture that said, "We see you. We see your father. We honor both." Tyron walked across the stage slowly, chin high, steps steady. His heart pounded, not from nerves, but from pride. Pride in himself, and pride in knowing exactly who his father was and what it meant to carry his name. He took his diploma, shook the principal's hand, and turned toward the crowd. His eyes searched until they found one face. Solomon didn't wave. He didn't stand. He just met his son's eyes and gave the smallest, most meaningful smile of the day. Tyron nodded once, then stepped off the stage. The applause didn't fade quickly. Parents who hadn't clapped all night were now on their feet, cheering. Some even wiped their eyes, not sure why, but feeling they had just seen something important. Solomon sat back in his chair and let the moment flow over him. He wasn't the kind of man to cry in public, but inside something loosened. Not grief, not pain, just a release. The kind that comes when a circle feels complete, even if it never really is. Names kept being called, but everything had changed. Every student who walked the stage did so in the echo of what had just happened, not because it was dramatic, not because it might go viral, but because it was real. And the story didn't end with applause. When father and son met again outside the gym, it would be more than a proud hug. It would be the passing of something deeper. 20 minutes later, the last name was called. The graduating class threw their caps, screamed with relief, and hugged like they hadn't seen each other in years. Phones lit up, cameras flashed, balloons bobbed above the crowd. The students began filing out through the double doors toward the back lot. Solomon didn't move right away. He sat quietly as the noise swelled around him, soaking it all in. The music, the laughter, the sweep of red and silver gowns. His eyes followed Tyron as he disappeared into the hallway with his classmates. A teacher gave Tyron a high five. Another pulled him in for a side hug. But even in the chaos, Tyron turned once, just once, and looked back. Solomon caught it. A glance that asked, "Did you see me?" His expression gave the answer. Every second. The crowd thinned. Families shuffled out with flowers and balloons. Solomon stood slowly, stretching stiff legs. Creed walked over as the gym emptied. He didn't speak right away, just looked at Solomon, then at the exit. "You okay?" Creed finally asked. Solomon nodded. "I've been through worse." Creed gave a small smile. "Yeah, but it still shouldn't have happened." "No," Solomon said. "It shouldn't have." Another SEAL, Javier Meeks, joined them. "We tried to stay low-key, but once that guy put his hand near his belt..." Solomon lifted a hand. "You did what needed to be done." That was enough. The three men stood quietly for a moment, letting the noise drain from the room. Then Solomon said, "I want to see my boy." Outside, the sun was fierce against the concrete. Long shadows stretched from the bleachers onto the back lot. Students gathered in clusters, posing for pictures, tossing caps again, calling out to relatives. Tyron stood near the flagpole, gown half unzipped, diploma folder in one hand, phone in the other. When he saw his father walking toward him, he stopped mid-conversation. The crowd around him faded away. They met halfway. Tyron spoke first. "You okay?" Solomon nodded. "You?" "Yeah," Tyron said, then looked down. "They tried to move you." "I know." Tyron's jaw tightened. "I was ready to walk off that stage, Dad. I swear I was 2 seconds from saying something." Solomon placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "And that's why you didn't." Tyron looked up. "What do you mean?" "Because you knew I could handle it. And because you handled your moment like a man. You didn't let anyone take it from you." Tyron held his breath. "Who were those guys that stood up?" Solomon glanced back. The 6 SEALs were outside now too, gathered near the exit, talking quietly. They weren't looking for attention, just watching, like always. "They're men I bled with," Solomon said. "Men who know what loyalty means. Men who don't forget." Tyron nodded slowly. "That was powerful." "It was necessary," Solomon replied. "Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. And sometimes standing without words speaks more than 1,000. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Tyron smiled. "You gonna tell me those war stories now?" Solomon chuckled. "Some of them. You're old enough for the real parts now." Father and son stood shoulder to shoulder. Not just family anymore. 2 men connected by something that couldn't be explained, only lived. Across the lot, Creed lifted a hand. Not a wave, something deeper. It was just a gesture of respect. Tyron returned it without hesitation. The sun kept climbing. But for the Dryden men, time felt different now. One more moment remained. The real lesson hadn't yet been spoken aloud. Most of the crowd had gone by the time Solomon and Tyron walked back to the parking lot. A few families still lingered, laughing around folding chairs, loading cars with flowers and gifts. The buzz of the day had quieted, and the sun softened into early evening light. Solomon unlocked the Charger, the same car his wife once drove to teacher meetings and family road trips. Tyron paused at the passenger door, tracing his fingers over a scratch near the handle. "She would have been the loudest one today," he said softly. "She would have made you retake every photo until your smile looked right," Solomon answered, managing a grin. They climbed in and shut the doors. The car was warm from the sun, but inside it felt like a cocoon, sealed away from the world. Tyron turned to his father. "I gotta ask, why didn't you say anything to those guards? You just sat there." Solomon tapped the steering wheel, then looked at him. "Because I don't have to stand up to prove who I am. And I don't need to raise my voice to be heard." Tyron looked out the window, thinking. Solomon went on. "You know how many times in my life I've had to choose between letting something slide or blowing it up? What those men tried to do today, it wasn't new. But how we respond, that's what defines us." "But they disrespected you," Tyron said. "In front of everybody." "Yes," Solomon replied, "and everyone saw it. But they also saw the truth. They saw 6 men, who had every reason to be somewhere else, stand up. Not because I asked, because they knew what that moment meant." Tyron sat with that. Solomon spoke again. "Son, life will give you 100 chances to react with anger. And sometimes anger is right. But most times silence cuts deeper. Dignity lasts longer. That's what people remember." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded photo, the one of baby Tyron in his mother's arms. "I carried this through Kandahar. I carried it when I lost your mom. And I carried it here today. Not because it gives me strength, but because it reminds me what's worth protecting." Tyron's voice was low. "You always knew who had your back." Solomon smiled. "I didn't need to know. I just had faith. Real men don't vanish when things get hard. They show up. They stand." There was a pause. Then Tyron spoke. "I want to be like that. Like you." "You already are," Solomon said. "You walked that stage with pride. You didn't let anger steal your moment. You stayed grounded, even when the world tried to throw you off balance." Outside, the last of the SEALs climbed into their vehicles. Creed gave one final look toward the Charger before driving off. Solomon nodded back. No words, just the quiet acknowledgement of something permanent. Tyron leaned back in his seat. "So what now?" Solomon turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. "Now we drive home." "You get to pick dinner." Tyron grinned. "Waffle House." Solomon chuckled. "Of course." As they pulled out of the lot, the school faded behind them. But the memory of what happened inside that gym would not fade. Not for anyone who had been there. And for Tyron, that day marked something far greater than a diploma. It was the day he learned manhood had nothing to do with noise, and everything to do with how you carry yourself when the world stops watching. Some people shout to be seen, others sit in silence, and are never forgotten.